All right. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, everyone, depending on where you are connecting from. We see that people are joining. Welcome, welcome. We might wait a minute or two before we start. Thank you for joining what has become a weekly appointment, Labs Thursdays webinars, usually on Thursdays. And as we wait for people to join, I take the opportunity to share some housekeeping rules. So many of you are familiar with them by now, but it's always good to have them as a reminder. So this session is being recorded and it will be available on our website and on our YouTube channel together with our previous webinars. You might want to check them. They are very good resources. And also we're keeping up with times, so we have a new tool to enjoy our webinars with automatically translated subtitles so that they become ever more accessible. As you see on screen, you have to follow this very simple procedure. Click on the caption section, the two C's on the bottom left of the screen. Click on the tab, you choose your preferred language, and that should be it. So a disclaimer, of course, is that when AI is involved, just like in this case with translation and transcription, we always need to be very mindful of possible limits. Other than that, last thing for me to remind you is that the Q&A session after the presentation today will be, as usual, conducted using Slido. We will not be checking the Zoom chat, so please connect to Slido. You can use the QR code on screen or the code word disinfo. And to get you acquainted with the tool, let us know where are you joining us from today. And after the other question is which sector of this beautiful Defenders community do you represent? And as people start replying, thank you so much. Let's start. So probably should have said this before. I'm Maria Giovanna Sessa. I am the research manager at the Lab, and I have the pleasure to moderate this webinar today. Our speakers today is Dr. Bruce White, who is the founding director of the Organization for Identity and Cultural Development. At OICD, he works at the intersection of academia and practice, developing programs to address identity-based divisions across social polarization, conflict transformation, education, policing, and public health. His work encompasses creating technologies, conducting research, designing trainings and practice methods, and developing impact enhancement and evaluation tools. That's a mouthful, but that's exactly what we're going to discuss today, where Bruce is going to present their recently developed toolkit, the Reclaiming Our Narratives Toolkit, which is designed to counter identity-based disinformation through positive identity expansion. And it is absolutely important and refreshing to focus on the development of solutions, of the development of alternative, healthy, functional narratives that ultimately spill over into community resilience. And I also have to say that it is great to have a male speaker on these topics, which is unfortunately unusual, but it is really, in fact, proof that gender and identity-based information are not just a woman's problem, but they are a community one. So without further ado, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Bruce, for agreeing to presenting the toolkit. And I will leave you now the floor, and I will see you all back at the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Pleasure to be here. Welcome, everybody. Great to see people from so many different places and from different sectors. It's wonderful to be here with the EU Disinfo Lab, particularly as I've said to Maria before, that I was quite inspired to put this toolkit together with our team because of a webinar I saw as a resource that had been recorded and put on the EU Disinfo site. For those of you who might be new to understanding identity-based disinformation, I highly recommend the other webinar that has been done by the team there. So that's something to watch. It has some great examples actually of disinformation campaigns that will go further than the examples I'll be able to cover today. So do look that up. I think it was really inspiring for me. Great, so I'm going to share my screen and get into the presentation. 1 second. Okay, so the QR code there on the title page leads to an article that is on our website, which discusses the tool and gives links to download the tool, which is available as a free PDF and also as a print edition if you like, something solid. And so that's what I'll be speaking to in this session. So do feel free to follow along. You'll get more detail in that article as well. But I'm going to be outlining what the tool is about and why we've developed it and why we think it's important. And I hope to also share some of the basics to give people a bit of confidence to get into actually using and deploying the tool. And again, just to say that one of the reasons we put this tool together is because of the webinar hosted here, where we saw after identity disinformation was laid out to people, I think it was overwhelmingly civil society and NGOs, which I see represented here, that it was very obvious that people were very keen to understand more about identity-based disinformation, but didn't necessarily know how to go to the next step to practically counter what it was that they were seeing all around them. And what we do at the OICD is we look very concretely and very precisely at identity manipulation. We have worked in conflict transformation for most of our existence over the last 20 years or so, but now we're really focused on identity-based disinformation and radicalization, extremism, and all of the related sectors. So we found it very important to take the identity based knowledge that we have in academia into practice. And this is one example of several resources that we develop to help practitioners and policymakers to get a handle on what's going wrong in particular problems like disinformation that we see here. So the challenge with identity-based disinformation is that it goes beyond just fake news, right? Identity-based disinformation is not only false, but it actually attacks the very psychological and social mechanisms which underpin our social and psychological life. We've again called that weaponization of identity, and we see it in any conflict, of course, especially violent conflict, but any human conflict involves some kind of identity shift. So identity-based disinformation, it targets this core sense of who we are, our sense of self. It embodies values, beliefs, ideas that we have about who we are in terms of where we come from, heritage, group affiliations. And often its goal is to fray human bonds, to divide communities, and to cause the kind of harm that we see hostile states in particular attempting to cause to societies. So again, beyond fake news, identity-based disinformation targets this psychological and social system that we call identity. And if anyone's interested, I am actually a psychological anthropologist. I was originally an academic, so I'm very interested in the actual psychological and social and cultural systems that sort of underpin our everyday lives. And I think if we're attuned to that level of existence, it's very clear how some of the messaging that we see attacks those systems. So again, that's the focus of this toolkit. So the link, the QR code there leads to a Voxpol article that I published recently with a colleague, and it goes much deeper than I'll be able to go here into some of the points I'll be making. So do have a look at that if you're interested in more of the anatomy of identity-based disinformation. But just to summarize, some of the ways in which this manifests is that we're given false choices. So identity-based disinformation messaging essentially says you can't be these multiple things, you have to be one thing. So you can't be patriotic and critical of your country. It forces us down identity pathways or specific single ways to express who it is that we are within a cultural setting. And again, if anybody's interested, there's a great book about this. There are many academic resources that we use, but one that to highlight is Identity and Violence by Amartya Sen. Some of you will, I think, know about that. And in that book and in many of Sen's articles, he talks about the danger of singular identity construction. So this is where we're channeled to think of ourselves, again, just in one way rather than many. And I do think that this core idea of the diminishment or reduction of possible identities is at the heart of understanding how identity-based disinformation works, but it also sits at the heart of how we can counter it or build resilience and strategies to counter it. So I'll be coming back to that point a bit during the presentation. But the second point here is emotional manipulation. So alongside these kind of false dichotomies, these false choices, we get messaging which is deliberately designed to trigger emotional states. And those emotional states can actually be positive or negative, as we cover in the book, but or on the PDF. But we often see, obviously, things like fear and anger and resentment as the negative emotions, and as well as bypassing the critical thinking. And once we're sort of emotional about something, obviously we're not thinking critically, we're sort of reactive. In addition to that emotional manipulation, those emotional states actually help to channel us down those single identity pathways. So it's not just bypassing critical thinking, it's actually increasing this dangerous turn towards single identity construction over multiple, or losing access to multiple identity construction. Number three, we're all very obviously familiar with this term, echo chambers. The identity-based disinformation really thrives in echo chambers, and we're constantly reinforced. Our beliefs and ideas are constantly reinforced. And again, that works to contribute to this narrowing of perspectives and identity. And then number four, probably the most obvious, and the one that in our community of people trying to defend against this kind of psychological attack, is othering, which we see all the time with identity-based disinformation. We're demonizing a particular group to fuel division and create a common enemy. So one of the ways in which I think it's interesting to think about why this works so well, so negatively, but so well, why identity-based disinformation is so powerful, is because underneath all of these techniques, what it's actually doing is exploiting universal human needs. And in our organization, the OICD, we divide these needs up into four categories. And the first is belonging. And, if you can belong, the promises made by the identity-based disinformation suggest that you can belong to our group, but you need to narrow down what it is that you represent and who it is that you are. And so there's this promise to join the group if you abide by our kind of narratives and our sense of who it is that we are. So there's a promise, but there's a sort of commitment as well, if you like. So we're fulfilling that sense of belonging. You can also feel significant. We talk about the need for self-esteem and status and significance. Identity-based disinformation will more often than not promise some significance in your life, even if it's saying that it wants you to hate a bunch of people. What it's actually doing is probably underneath that, making you feel uplifted, no longer the victim, maybe a little bit superior, for example. So you can feel significant if you join our righteous cause against them, right? Another universal human need is the need to feel free of fear and suffering. And we see a lot of identity-based disinformation making a promise that it will make you feel free of that fear. You can be safe because you're joining this group, and we are the people that are going to help you feel secure in the world. And of course, alongside that is the construction of the other as the threat. but if you join our group, we'll save you from that other, or we'll at least give you a group within which you can defend yourself and others. So it's also interesting to reflect on how these needs overlap and intersect. So identity-based disinformation can really combine the fulfillment of these human needs in a really attractive package, if you like. And the last one here, you can have justice if you support attacking those who are unfair. And we talk about the human need for equality and justice, and identity-based disinformation campaigns almost always tap into this sense of grievance or need for equality, or if it paints you as a victim, then you're going to rise up as the victim and overcome the aggressor. So these promises that identity-based disinformation messaging makes to us are so powerful because they tap into deep psychological human universal needs. And I think that's an important thing for us to recognize as we approach a disinformation campaign and work out how we're going to provide those needs for people that are vulnerable to being exploited by the disinformation campaigns, a technique we'll be coming back to shortly. So, of course, in this sector and in the OICD, we work with a variety of different practitioners, from police to social workers to educators. We do see that there is a default position, of course, a very understandable default position, is to confront disinformation with facts and information. So when our impulse as people that want to protect and defend and make the world a safer place is to discredit what the campaign messaging is saying. And one of the problems with identity-based disinformation is that has a high risk, that approach has a high risk of backlash. And that's because of the way that identity works and the way in which the identity-based disinformation campaigns are exploiting identity as part of their key technique. And the simplest ways to understand this is to use a term, the backfire effect, which just basically says that directly challenging a core belief can make someone defend it more strongly. I'm sure many of us understand that and have seen that in our personal and our work lives. But specifically with identity, there's a really important, I think, theory in academia called identity fusion, which talks about the fact that in the run-up to radicalization, or once somebody is radicalized and potentially on the cusp of committing a violent offense, we can see that their personal identities are fused with their sense of what it means to be part of the collective group that they have joined, both sort of psychologically and socially. And so when we attack or, try and discredit or confront identity-based disinformation campaigns, the danger is that the people who are adjacent or have subscribed to that disinformation and feel compelled by its messaging will simply feel that you as the person trying to counter the false narratives are attacking them. And given that our goal is to reach these people and to try and contain the spread of such disinformation campaigns, this is not a particularly helpful response for the mitigation of the power of identity-based disinformation. There's another slightly more complex point that anybody who's interested, I think it's useful to follow up on, which is that what we do a lot at the OICD is measure the degree of narrative agency. That's the ability for us to tell our own stories. Coming back to what I said earlier, referencing Amartya Sen, if we have the ability to construct our identities in many different ways, that carries with it a high level of identity agency. So we're able to shift perspectives and positions very freely and adaptively. Now, what happens with identity-based disinformation is it slowly decreases that agency, and therefore the most vulnerable people that are going to suffer from its effects are probably already low in narrative agency. And the problem with counter narratives, narratives that obviously try and directly refute what is being said in the disinformation is that they assume that the person that they're focusing on has narrative agency. So I think that's a really important and potentially interesting way to look at this problem, that we really need to assume that the people we're trying to protect from identity-based disinformation may not have the narrative agency that would be necessary for them to go, oh, I see, here are two different narratives. I understand that this one's wrong and this one's right, because they are wrapped up in the effects that are happening to them with the identity-based disinformation through the kind of effects that I've mentioned in the slide before. So again, the danger with direct confrontation is that it can result in the messenger that's trying to confront the disinformation simply being associated with the them group. And I think we all see this across Europe and in North America, across the world. This is kind of the nature of the war of culture and the war of narratives, that things can be reversed and changed and meanings can be quickly swapped around, and the people that are trying to protect are actually reframed as the other. So I'm going to move on there and say, well, what do we do if we can't confront directly? And what we're going to be speaking about, and what this toolkit is about, is identity expansion, or positive identity expansion. And this is a very different approach to countering those disinformation narratives. Just very briefly, instead of fighting the narrative, we're actually trying to build optionality, build multiple identity pathways for people to be able to go down as a protective mechanism to build psychological resilience to identity-based disinformation, which tries to remove that optionality and that adaptability. So the goal is to broaden and strengthen the target audience's sense of self, or at least to give them the ingredients and the connections that they need to be adaptive in constructing who it is that they are. And the method that we use to do that is to provide multiple healthy and culturally authentic ways for people to express their values and meet their needs. Going back to that slide before, when I was emphasizing the fact that identity-based disinformation targets those needs, we have to make sure that the alternative narratives that we produce are serving the same needs as the narratives of disinformation that are using those needs to manipulate people's identities. So that's really at the heart of the method that is at the heart of the toolkit. So the result is a stronger cultural immune system. That's one way of thinking about it. We have the ability to maintain that optionality of identity. We're less likely to be channeled down these very specific single identities. So just a comparison slide, counter narratives, which might sort of attempt to debunk or refute or directly attack or counterattack, they risk triggering the defenses that I spoke about earlier. And they are obviously set up to oppose the identity-based disinformation narrative. They are kind of reactive. They wait for the identity-based disinformation narrative before they can be constructed, right? Equal alternative narratives, which you can read much more about in the actual resource. Again, the PDF, the QR code I'll be showing again, but there's the PDF that you can download, or the print version. So the equal alternative narratives are narratives that are proactive, i.e. we can put them into the spaces that we perceive as vulnerable in advance of the disinformation narratives hitting there. And that gives us obviously an expanded strategic platform compared to the reactive nature of counter narratives. And the reason we can do that is because equal alternative narratives are simply focused on expanding the number of ways that the target audience, who I'll come to in a minute, but the target audience can be anybody. It often is mainstream society individuals, but focusing on ways to allow them to connect with ideas about who it is that they are in a free and adaptive way, so that they have greater resilience when disinformation campaigns come into their orbit. Equal alternative narratives avoid confrontation, therefore reducing that backfire effect. There is still a risk, and we talk about that in the toolkit. And essentially what we're doing with alternative narratives is we're not saying you shouldn't listen to these people, you shouldn't be like this, which is what a counter narrative would do. It says, hey, here are other ways to think about what it means to be us, or here are interesting, important ways to think about what it means to be you, that provide for this sense of significance, that make people feel more secure, etc. So they're narratives that tap into those needs and provide for those needs in a sustainable way that doesn't lead to the persecution of minorities or whatever the other is that is at the heart of the disinformation campaign. So equal alternative narratives aim to outcompete, and I think this is an important concept in tackling disinformation of any kind. We're actually aiming to outcompete propaganda and disinformation, or negative propaganda and disinformation, not to attack it, not to try and dismantle it, just to try and outcompete it. And to outcompete it, we need to understand how it is being effective so that we can be effective. And again, another concept here that I think is useful that's connected to outcompete is just this idea that, disinformation campaigning is actually providing individuals with something, and we've got to work out what that is. If it wasn't providing them with something, it wouldn't work, it wouldn't spread, it wouldn't be effective. But we know it's effective, we can see the dangerous power that it has. So out-competing is to understand what it provides so that we can provide a sustainable, resonant alternative. Okay, so I'm just going to give some examples. Again, in the time that we have, I'll probably only be speaking for another 5 or 10 minutes. I'm not going to have time to go through into detail, but again, there's a quite substantial resource, and we have lots of case studies in here, historical case studies, and a case study where we go through all of these steps one by one in great detail. But effectively, what we're doing is we're analyzing the disinformation campaign that we're trying to counter. We're defining and understanding the target audience. And when we look at this in detail and we talk to people about it, there's often people often quickly kind of goes, oh, the target audience is the other that's being demonized. Is it? And they would ask that question, and we need to constantly reorientate. The target audience is not the people that are trying to be discredited by the disinformation campaign. The target audience are the people that the disinformation campaign is trying to influence. So they are not the other at the center of the campaign. They are the people whose minds are trying to be manipulated against the other. And that's an important concept in the toolkit. So we need to understand the target audience. Again, many of us in our working lives are rightly compelled to defend the others at the heart of the disinformation campaign. But this approach actually doesn't require us to do that. It's a deeper, more foundational understanding of how the target audience's psychology is being manipulated so that they then attack or persecute or demonize the other. So we are interested in this approach, in how we can protect the other at the center of these disinformation campaigns, but we do it in a different way. We don't do it directly, we do it indirectly through attempting to build resilience against the manipulation of identity amongst the target audience. So that's a very different approach potentially from the majority of approaches that we see in action. So the third step is to develop equal alternative narratives, which I've talked about. The fourth step that we'll all be familiar with, from 4 to 7, I think we're all familiar with. 4 is that once we've got a message, once we've got a counter message, or an alternative narrative in this case, we need to work out how to put that into the ecosystem, or the information ecosystem, that's being attacked by the IBD, by the Identity-Based Disinformation campaign. So we identify the trusted voices and channels that we're going to put that counter messaging out into. We are going to then craft our messages to suit that specific platform or platforms, and we're going to put the narrative design into force. And again, there's a lot of detail on how to do each of these steps in the toolkit itself. And then lastly, we want to, before we actually deploy anything, it's very, very important, specifically in identity-based disinformation, to follow a very careful, ethical, step-by-step approach. And we have at the back of the toolkit a sort of checklist for ethics. And one of the reasons we put so much emphasis on ethics is not just because it's ethically important to do so, but actually we find that following an ethical structured approach ends up being way more effective than not, because each step encourages us to go back and make sure that what we're doing fits with this theoretical understanding of human psychology and social and cultural life, which combines with ethics very closely. Okay, so just very quickly, you'll see there's lots of case studies inside the toolkit itself, but just to give you a very quick example of the kind of thing that we can apply this to. So some of you will be familiar with this, some not. This was from some years back when there was a fake, at the time it wasn't understood as fake, but there was a letter sent to a local authority in the city of Birmingham in the UK, suggesting that there was an Islamist plot to take over schools in Birmingham. And this was kind of leaked to the media and British media and even government ministers and other policy organizations and departments took it actually seriously. And there was a big sort of national level reaction to this. But kind of amongst that reaction, we saw that a lot of the parents of children in Birmingham were very affected by this and activated and mobilized by it. And of course, it was later understood that it was a fake letter, but it caused a really big tidal wave, not a ripple, a tidal wave of reactions across British media and society. And so just to use this as an example, here we see that the target audience is not the Muslims, right? So just to go back to that point, the target audience are the non-Muslim parents and the wider British public. They are the targets of the disinformation because it's the disinformation about the Muslims that is trying to be transmitted to those people. So they're the targets. And we can see that the needs exploited by that, certainly the fear that I mentioned, the sense of wanting to live without fear, or security, you might call that need security. The fear for children's safety and British values is being exploited, and the idea of justice. If you look at that example, and we have that example written up in one of the cases, we have 9 case studies in here, stretching between different time periods and contexts. And you can see that this sense of, as a parent, I must do something, I must take action. And so that, I think the Department of Education was flooded by letters and emails demanding action against these Muslim teachers and people in positions of authority in the education system in Birmingham. And we can see that the way in which this identity-based disinformation worked was to sort of compel people who may not, before they encountered this disinformation, see being a true Brit, being a true member of the society. It required you now to be suspicious of Muslims in civic life, and that was not necessarily the case before this for the people that were affected. So we've got this narrowing of identity from sort of seeing Britain as a much larger thing to suddenly seeing it as kind of slightly divided along these religious divides. So the narrative at the heart of this was then, Muslim educators are a secret threat to your children. As I said, that's targeting the need for security. The direct confrontation here would have been risky. If we had gone in and said that's Islamophobic nonsense, the letter is fake early on, this might have been considered to be almost another sort of subtle way of pulling the wool over our eyes, and it could potentially result in an even larger reaction where people are sort of feeling that there's now multiple levels of government involved in this cover-up, and now they're pretending that the letter is fake, and it could have led to a sort of spiraling. And I think all of us are, again, very aware of this playing out on an almost daily basis in the media across our societies today. So an alternative narrative strategy here is to take away one of the things that we focus on in the toolkit very precisely and with great sort of need to raise awareness here, is that we actually don't want to be talking about, in this case, we don't want to be talking about or referencing Muslims at all. Effective counter or alternative narratives are not the opposite to the original disinformation. Again, they are not counter narratives, they're alternative narratives. So what we're doing is we're actually lifting up the sense of the need that's being attacked here is security, potentially status as well, or self-esteem, because we want to feel safe, but we also want to feel in control, and we want to feel as though we're doing a good job as parents or the wider public in protecting our children. So an alternative narrative needs to understand that that's the need being exploited, and to serve that need in a different way, right? So that's the first thing that an alternative narrative strategy has to do. It doesn't counter, it works out which need is being triggered, and it forms an intelligent, structured, contextual response. So here we're looking at reinforcing professionalism and existing safety systems, because we're responding to the need that security is breaking down. So an example message here would be, our schools have rigorous established safeguarding procedures. We are proud of the professionalism and dedication of all of our vetted teaching staff. So again, this isn't some magic silver bullet to stop everyone feeling threatened by this, but it is potentially more effective than coming out with a counter strategy right at the beginning there. So the outcome of something that targets the need rather than the content of the disinformation is that we are fulfilling that need constructively. As I mentioned, we're expanding the idea of a concerned parent to include the fact that we have in the country professional systems, and we can take a pride in that and be part of it and feel good about the fact that the society is able to protect as it stands. And so as we build out, if that's the central strategy moving forward, then we look for the voices, the context through which we can broadcast this alternative narrative messaging. And here we would have local education authority, potentially respected head teachers. We might put out messaging through school newsletters, local community Facebook groups, etc. Obviously, this is very contextual to the identity-based disinformation campaign that we are trying to counter. So this is just an example of that specific one in Birmingham. We would have very different voices and channels depending on which campaign we were trying to address. So just an example headline: upholding our community's values, text: fairness and judging on evidence are core values we teach our children. Now, fairness and judging on evidence are core values that we teach our children. Is implicit in that language is a sense of almost national or societal identity. So you've got belonging in there. We're serving belonging needs with the idea of fairness. Some of you may know the idea of fair play is a very British one. So you're keying into sort of ideas of Britishness here, which again is the idea is to be out competing the propaganda or the disinformation campaign that's trying to split that Britishness apart, right? So let's be the example they need by ensuring our community discussions remain respectful and fact-based, especially when concerns are raised. Our strength lies in working together through established, transparent processes. Now, this is a very do-goody example, and many examples that we have in the toolkit are much more subtle than this, but I just chose it because it's pretty straightforward. We're tackling these needs, we're tackling the way in which the disinformation is working on an identity level, and we're trying to provide an alternative to that. Again, this is not a silver bullet, but it's certainly a bullet that can have an effect in comparison to a counter narrative. Now, in the toolkit, we go into quite a lot of detail about how we would layer these messages and create sort of different strategies that would overlap in an overarching counter campaign. So this is just one small message of what a counter campaign might look like, but it gives you the architecture. So if anybody's interested, there's quite a lot of academic work that we've used to put this together, and we have a whole chapter in the toolkit that goes through the academic work that supports this. That link is, I think, back to the Vox poll article that we've published, which has some references in there, but there's a much more detailed list of academic references at the back of in one of the chapters of the toolkit itself. I won't go too much into it because I realize we've only got 20 minutes left, but you can see there's a multidisciplinary basis for these approaches. And I would say, as somebody who has come from psychological anthropology, that one of the reasons that this kind of approach hasn't been very developed up until now is because it does require a lot of interdisciplinary understanding, and the combination of those disciplines and their theoretical and practical approaches need to be combined, and it's been a complex job to do that. And that's one of the missions that we have at our organization, is to try and pull all of those threads together so that we can build powerful practical tools. So again, I've been talking from this resource. You can see oicd.net/resources. It's the one in the middle of that page. That QR code gives you a direct link to the publisher for the print edition, slightly cheaper than buying it on Amazon. So please, if you want it for free, you can get it on the PDF there. The print edition is 15-20 pounds, I think. And you can find it on Amazon or any of the booksellers. Key takeaways. Identity-based disinformation is a psychological threat that exploits our need for belonging, security, and significance. Direct confrontation often backfires. Positive identity expansion is an evidence-based strategy to build resilience by offering compelling, inclusive, and culturally authentic equal alternative narratives. So I hope that was interesting, and I'd love to take some questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Bruce. That was certainly interesting. And a lot of the people from the audience thought too as well. In fact, our Slido Q&A has already started to receive some questions. Please continue sending them. We will do our best to address most of them, and let's start from the first one that we all see on the screen. Would trolling ops like "it's okay to be white" count as identity-based disinformation?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. It's focusing on an identity-based marker, and obviously we need to see more of the campaign itself. That's just an isolated statement, isn't it? Yeah, you mentioned trolling ops, so yeah, definitely.
All right. Yes, I would definitely agree with that. For those of you who don't know, this is a trolling campaign that started on 4chan in 2017, and I mean, I think that the content is rather self-explanatory. And yeah, let's move on to the next one. Could you please no, sorry. How can this identity agency be reclaimed without stirring more disinformation or discrimination? And I think that that's the pretty common trade-off between talking about the problem and ending up giving it too much visibility, or even amplifying it, which is indeed an issue. But I think we all agree that this is also not an excuse for inaction. So, Bruce, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, well, I think at the heart of what we've tried to do in the toolkit is actually to be very careful about not having this backlash, right? And so we talk about this very specifically in the toolkit, but a good equal alternative narrative message will actually not look like it's trying to counter the disinformation. Because ultimately what an equal alternative narrative is doing is giving the target audience more ways to be themselves. So if you do it well, it sort of falls under the radar of the trolls and other people that are hanging around waiting to respond to a counter narrative, for example. I think that's what you mean by that question. But if it's not, identity agency be reclaimed. Yeah, I think that's what you mean, but if not, please do follow up.
All right, thank you. Yes, I think that's also how I understood it. Could you please tell us about concrete examples from real life of how it was applied and what were the results? You showed us some examples. Maybe you want to share another one that is particularly significant that people can also find on the toolkit. Little spoiler.
Yeah, well, I'll give you one that isn't in the toolkit just to sort of give it something extra. I found one very interesting. We were training social workers in these techniques some years ago, and it's interesting to reflect on the fact that this can be done one-to-one as well as at scale. I've been talking about doing it at scale in this session, haven't I? Because I've been talking about countering campaigns that are affecting, in the Birmingham case, that's many tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. But I think an example from a social worker working with, let's say, a gang member who has come out of prison for violent offences to do with the gang. Um, a gang membership or a terrorist organization that has people in their ranks through exploiting their identities, through the idea that they can belong to that group, whether it's a terrorist group or a gang group, a gang. That's very prevalent. And what we found training social workers was that we actually, in our real world work, I've been talking about this particular resource, but in our real world work, we go a bit deeper than we've been able to go in this toolkit, and we help people to map identities. Very similar to the analysis we present in the toolkit. It's just actually a visual way of understanding these exploitative methods that are used. And a social worker that we were working with was mapping the identity of a gang member that was released after serving time for murder. And they encountered in that identity the way in which that particular individual was fulfilling their need to belong and filling their need to meter out equality and justice through a whole sub-narrative of protection. And the idea of protection um, came started very clearly forward in the analysis that the social worker was doing. So the gang member was clearly very attached to this single identity of being a protector, and this was a protector of their family and their community. And once the social worker was able to understand the importance of that concept in their client's life, they were able to utilize that understanding of how that need was being fulfilled. And they were able to think about other ways to meet that need. So, for example, instead of being a protector by joining a gang, which is obviously one way to protect your family, because if you're in a gang, you're going to be powerful, you might have a weapon, etc. The social worker might ask questions such as, did any of your relatives were they in an occupation that was about protecting people? And discovering, for instance, that a grandfather had been a firefighter sounds like a completely irrelevant piece of information if we're just in conversation with somebody. But if we understand that the role of that identity and is to fulfill the need to protect, and we understand that there's a pro-social link to protection in a grandfather or somewhere else, the social worker can then amplify that connection and make it much more clear to the individual that that's a pro-social way of expressing protection. So what you're doing there is you're allowing the individual to constantly see that there's multiple ways of expressing and meeting the same need. And in that case, the social worker's ability to reach that individual and give them an alternative pathway out of rejoining the gang is amplified and increased and improved by going through that method of understanding what's driving the underlying identity and what's keeping it there. So that's just an example of, I think, a very common way that we're thinking about this problem and how it can be applied both to individuals and to larger groups.
Thank you. That's extremely interesting, and I think that although we don't see it on screen anymore because the questions, oh, now we see it on screen again. I think it already taps into what Ruth is asking, which is, I can see this as a way to prevent people from going down a conspiratorial pipeline. Do you think this approach could work on someone who has already developed a strong conspiratorial identity? So, as you were explaining. In short, yes, it can serve this purpose. Now moving on from the single, because this looks like a very important ad hoc tailored approach on individuals who are end up being the perpetrators of IBD. Looking at the larger picture, how could platforms integrate this approach, considering that they tend to amplify polarizing content? So let's say in a probably rather undiplomatic way that sometimes often disinformation is something that is in their favor because it allows engagement, visibility, ultimately monetization.
Yeah, so definitely. We've been thinking quite a lot about this, and I'm hoping that we'll start working with a platform on this. So the the most important thing to say here is that the algorithms that drive attention can be adapted to understand. We know so much about the users on any platform, or any platform knows so much about their users, obviously, in order to be able to serve up the algorithms that they do. I think there's a lot of capacity here to essentially use what we understand about the way in which we adopt particular different versions of ourselves throughout a day or a week or a month, and to ensure that somebody's being shown information and other information ecosystems that they will still find interesting, but they're ones that are intelligently understood to be interesting but different. And I think that in the work that I've seen from some psychologists, I think that there's an opportunity there to even, I know the platforms will be understandably worried about profits and so on, and you mentioned it, Maria. I do think that there's an unexplored potential there for such an algorithm, one that isn't constantly plugging away at the same identity position, but one that tentatively introduces a range of identity positions with the contextual understanding of that user's interests and world. That actually has the potential, I think, from what I understand about the psychology that's in that area, of releasing even more economic potential from a platform. Now that needs to be tested, and really, I think that would be a fascinating thing for a platform to get involved in testing. So we're looking to work in that area as part of our work on this more generally. But yeah, there's lots to say around that, and I think it would be important to really explore it. Thank you for the question.
Absolutely, that's brilliant actually, and also to look at the problem from another perspective of how to create an incentive for platforms to comply. So there's something in there for them to yeah. So moving on, and I already anticipate a positive reply on your side. Do you see an opportunity to integrate this approach into media literacy programs and in schools?
Definitely. In fact, we did work with a couple of schools in the UK on this, and we called it identity literacy. And I think you're right to link the two, media literacy and this conversation that we're having on identity. One of the things we found was that just making children and adults aware of how identity works can be a really fundamental step in building resilience. So without even having to do all of this alternative narrative construction, which I think can be done as well, and it is important to do, just breaking down the concepts of what identity is and why do we feel a certain way when somebody says something mean about us, right? What sort of emotions are we feeling, and why is that? Why do I feel hurt when somebody attacks my social group? Those sort of fundamental psychology questions, really, or psychological or anthropological questions, to find ways to just get those concepts across in a classroom can be hugely empowering, because it gives people the ability to recognize when their identities are being targeted, because they're actually more aware of what that is in them. We don't really have a good understanding in our general populace for what identity is, and certainly, therefore, kids in schools don't. And so to just explain what that is, it's almost like working out we have a new piece of our anatomy that now we can actually think about and feel and work out what's happening to. I think that's an incredibly valuable thing to do. So we call that identity literacy, and it's very much connected to media literacy, as you point out. I think within a media literacy program, obviously, I hope you're able to look at some of our examples there. We do talk about these 9 case studies. I would say 7 of which, could be media literacy case studies in the way that they use the media to manipulate identity. So please do use those if you find them interesting, or adapt them in any way that you feel would be good to make a media literacy program incorporate this.
Fantastic, thank you. Yes, and I mean, if I may add, that these are also like the school years are so important for identity formation, that if we manage to create a generation that might be a bit utopistic, but to create a generation that has whose identity is not perceiving as someone else as an antagonist, that could be also powerful. The next question that I see on screen has been, I think, already addressed by Bruce. In terms of algorithmic design, have you any examples where social media platforms have applied these principles to credibly address polarization and boost or reinforce alternative narratives? And where you, Bruce, you suggested this possible other way of looking at the issue, and bringing incentives for platforms to become allies also in this fight. Let's move on to the next question, which will probably be our last one as we are running out of time. What do you do if you are not a trusted messenger anymore? How do you reconnect with disentangled, inoculated, vulnerable target groups, which are often the target of IBD actors?
Yeah, great question. I mean, that's not an easy one to answer across all contexts, because you might literally be the only person that can reach somebody in a family or a social work context, for instance. So there might not be anything you personally can do as the messenger, but I've found in our work across different sectors that there's normally the ability to co-opt an organization or a group that understands what's happening to the target audience, and who either represents that target audience directly or cares about what's happening to them in whatever way. And again, when I'm saying target audience, I'm not talking about the others, I'm talking about the people that are that are trying to be influenced by the IBD actors. So in our experience, you would start looking for people that are trusted messengers and work through them. Very rarely, for instance, does our organization directly do any messaging. We help organizations who are already trusted by the target group to broadcast the messages. So it depends on your own identity, with a bit of a meta part of the answer there. Your own identity in terms of you as a practitioner, you as a change agent, in terms of how subtly you can work with people who do have that credibility and trust, and get the message through that way.
That's great. That was really the last question for today, as unfortunately we are running out of time. I see that there are many others, including one that asks how can you be contacted. I don't know, I would suggest maybe trying to reach out on LinkedIn. That's usually a good option for that. And I,
Sure.
yeah, sorry.
Can I put? No, I was just going to say, Can I put that slide up? Does that work?
Oh,
Because
of
there's an
course, yes,
email
exactly.
address
Yes.
there.
I was wondering if there was an email address. There is info@oicd.net. Thank you so much, and all the QR codes for the toolkit, and to also buy the book version. Thank you so much, Bruce, for being with us today. That was an incredibly insightful webinar. It was once again very refreshing to listen to concrete solutions. I might ask you to stop sharing your screen so we can have our very final slide, which will be about a little bit of self-promotion. As you might know, our October conference is coming up. This year we will be in Slovenia. The registration is now open for the UDIS-InfoLab annual conference. You can request your tickets now. Hurry up, because there are already so many requests, and we will be very happy to meet you in person there. After this webinar, we will have a few others coming up, even though the summer is approaching, and we might, I hope, slow down at some point in August, but it's still a far way to go until then. On the 19th of June, we have a webinar about legal obligations with a speaker from the University of Amsterdam. And on the 26th of June, a webinar with Logically about climate-related disinformation. That was all for today. I would like to thank once again Bruce for his precious insights, the audience for being with us, and my amazing colleague Maria for making this all possible behind the scenes. I wish you all a great continuation of your day and evening, and we will be in touch. Goodbye. Thank you.